2, 1. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to another exciting episode of Delusions of Grandeur, where we are going to be starting a new month, new theme, with local, regional horror films. So, why don't we go over to Dane, who's going to tell us about the film that we are going to discuss and where it was apparently filmed. Or wait, is it?
Am I mixed up? I thought.
No, it was Jacob selected this one.
All right.
Although I can speak for one piece of it that has something to do with my region, which is that some of the exteriors with Mason Verger's mansion, those were filmed at the Biltmore in Asheville.
Yeah.
So I can speak to that part.
Jake, why don't you tell us a little bit about this film and where it apparently is from? Because apparently it's kind of close to home.
Well, in some ways, yes. This is a movie from 2001, the Ridley Scott drama Hannibal, which to those somehow uninitiated or not clued in by that name, is the mostly sequel to the classic Jonathan Demme film, The Silence of the Lambs, based on the sequel novel by Thomas Harris. He wrote a trilogy of novels. I want to say the original one was titled The Red Dragon,
yes.
Then The Silence of the Lambs, and then Hannibal.
Yep.
Yeah. And
then he did Hannibal Rising, the prequel novel.
It's a lame movie covers on these.
Yeah, so I and I believe for the life of me cannot remember if I joined this group on the discussion of The Silence of the Lambs. If I did, it was one of the first ones I did. But I know y'all have done it.
We also have done Manhunter as well.
Oh, I missed that one. That's too bad.
So,
we could still hit Red Dragon, I guess. But anyway, per IMDb, this one is: living in exile, Dr. Hannibal Lecter tries to reconnect with now disgraced FBI agent Clarice Starling and finds himself a target for revenge from a powerful victim. Like I said, a Ridley Scott film. Dane already mentioned said victim, a charming individual named Mason Verger.
With the most beautiful face of all time.
Oh, indeed, yes.
Well, he's Gary Oldman, so he's a teen heartthrob, you know.
Right,
for sure.
And I'm sure he looked just like that when he was a teen heartthrob.
Exactly.
Well, we'll get into more on that, but I'll just go ahead and say I have long considered Oldman to be one of the more truly chameleonic actors out there, and this role is a good illustration of how that is. You know, he has a lot of roles where he's clearly Gary Oldman, but he also seems to love burying himself under makeup. So it seems to work.
What would you call a Gary Oldman versus chameleonic? Because to me, Gary Oldman in interviews, I was going to say off camera, but in interviews, he seems like a very kind of deliberately nondescript is not the right word, but like a kind of low key individual. Not a lot of isms to imitate, and so therefore he can slip into the roles just like a glove. And and you're right, Mason Verger is nothing like Commissioner Gordon, who's nothing like Bram Stoker's Dracula, who's nothing like the Fifth Element character he played, nothing like Dr. Smith in Lost in Space, nothing like that. You know, they're all unbelievably different from each other.
Right. Nothing like his Oscar-winning term is Winston Churchill. I mean,
exactly.
You know, another one where lots of makeup. But anyway, we'll come back to the characters. But
yeah.
So I guess we'll go ahead with this one and start with our first impressions. And well, since I'm looking right at Mo here, I don't know what y'all see on your screen, but that's what I'm seeing. Then why don't you give us your first impressions?
Extra special shout out to the 4K Kino Lorber edition with the slip here. Just pointing that out there.
I didn't know they had me on 4K. That's pretty sexy.
Looks beautiful.
Shit. I have to get some of the chunk of the change off of that release.
Um,
This movie I was friggin' hyped on, man. I actually saw this in the
Yeah.
theater. It was the very first rated R movie I ever went and saw by myself. My mom took me down there and like bought me the ticket, and made it all cool so that they could let me in. And I sat there in pretty much awe of it. I'd always wanted a sequel since Silence of the Lambs. That one I kind of slept on for a while, so I saw that probably later than most people at my uncle's house, and they're like old people. They always had produce sitting on the counter, so I always associated like that melon on the counter smell with old folks. But anyways, when it finally came down to happening, like I said, I was pretty much in awe of it. It's in many ways a pretty damn perfect sequel. I was always bummed that Jodie Foster wasn't in it. I'm sure there's reasons for that I've never gotten around to looking into. But I thought,
I can tell you
Julianne
some
Moore,
of them.
whatever, did a good.
Yeah, we'll get into that.
I think what's her name, Julianne Moore.
Mhm.
She
Yeah.
did a good job. It was serviceable.
Mhm.
And I've always just really liked it. I mean, he feeds like brains to a little kid. What's not to love,
Right. Oh, there's comments on that coming too. But anyway, so how about you, Dave? What about?
Well, I was hyped on it at the time, and this was before I'd known that there was like Manhunter before Silence of the Lambs and whatnot.
Hmm.
And some of you know that I was awarded by the state for a time a sort of person to take me out and do like activities. And
A big brother, I think.
a mentor.
Yeah.
A mentor
Yeah,
is
there
what
you
they awarded me. And he would take me out to movies and stuff like that. And Hannibal just so happened to be one of them.
Nice.
I'm sure the state would have loved that.
Well,
Nice.
it was funny because he was not the kind to entirely take me to that kind of a film, and but I was hyped about it because I'd read the book. And the thing is, I'm not a fan of Julianne Moore. I think that she is a very stone actor, that she doesn't show an entire amount of emotions. And I feel like she was just going through paces for the most part. But on the opposite end of things, I can see why they somewhat went with her too, because of the fact that, okay, Agent Starling, when she was in Silence of the Lambs, she was a newbie. She had started, she was just a spring chicken,
Yeah.
in the FBI fields. So now she's a seasoned FBI investigator and detective, and she's a little bit weathered from some of the ordeals that she has to deal with, including having to deal with Hannibal Lecter and the fact that he's still out there missing.
Mhm.
So I guess in a way I've come to terms with her in the role, but I still have my misgivings about her entirely. Mainly, I don't know. No, it's just I didn't think of her, in the role, and I maybe I thought that maybe I was so used to Jodie Foster being the role, and suddenly someone else taking the reign. I was like, well,
Yeah.
Well, I think I might be able to articulate what you're getting at, because I felt similar things about Julianne Moore, even though I think she's a fantastic actress. It's not really her, it's more so the fact that a lot of the roles that she gets cast in, they tend to, the conversation I hear in my head from studio execs is, okay, we need a generically good actress here. Let's pop Julianne Moore in there. That tends to be kind of how she fits. And it's not really anything having to do with her, because like she's played really specific fleshed out characters, like in Boogie Nights and in The Big Lebowski. And obviously she won Best Actress for Still Alice and stuff.
Phenomenal performance.
But you know what I mean, though. It's like she seems like she's somebody that is kind of the studio's other choice. And I don't think that's really fair to her. And in this case, that's exactly what she was. She was the studio's other choice because they couldn't get Jonathan Demme to come back to direct. They couldn't
Mhm.
get Jodie Foster to come back to star. So they had to go with Ridley Scott to direct, who I think is a good choice, honestly, for this kind of thing. And they picked Julianne Moore, who, again, objectively great actress. It's just more so that I wish that she was the studio's first choices more often, or at least gave that more of that impression. And in the cases when she is, like in Boogie Nights, for example, she can kill it, you know. So, and I'm saying it like she's bad or anything. It's not that at all. It's just more so like she so often feels like she's the other person that they grab because they couldn't get their first choices, and it's like, well, that's not fair to her and her talents, you know.
I agree with
Hmm.
that. And as far as anything else in the film, I thought it. Having read the novel, I
Hmm.
thought it played true to the novel.
Hmm.
So, as far as story wise, they definitely got Mason down pretty good. They weren't wild pigs, but they were they were wild pigs. They were boars,
Yeah,
but they
which
were
that's what
pigs.
they are here.
They were pigs. They were wild pigs
Hmm.
in the novel. That's the only real difference.
Well, I mean, they're very.
Was
I
that
mean,
really a difference, though?
boars,
Yeah.
pigs. I mean, they're so damn close.
You get the impression
Hogs.
someone like Verger probably would happily have pigs of a slightly feral nature.
Oh, certainly. And
uh,
feral hogs
oh
exist,
yeah,
and they're actually pretty nasty creatures.
they are nasty. But anyway, Dave, did you have any more thoughts on your initial or?
Um, I want to say that the ending really gets me every time. But we can get into that in more detail.
Yeah.
But I mean, there are elements of this that definitely creep me out to this day. So it's not that the film didn't do its job or anything like that.
Right.
It's just I have some misgivings about certain roles that people played. So
All right. How about you, Dan? What was your first impression?
Well, um, which again, I have all the Hannibal Lecter movies and the complete series of the show. I have them all on Blu-ray, and this is the only one that's in 4K as of right now. But I have
Hmm.
it. Beautiful set. Okay, so just for clarification, The Silence of the Lambs is one of my top five favorite movies of all time. I
Mhm.
saw it when I was like maybe 12, 13-ish, something like that, maybe a little younger. But it was a very formative movie for me in every capacity, acting, directing, pacing, um, the drama of the interactions between the characters, the horror with the thrills, because it's kind of a horror slash thriller. It kind of
Mhm.
walks in both worlds. Gave me a deep love of the study of serial killers and of people that are kind of abnormal in a criminal way. I like to think in another life that I might have been a not showboating version of like Dr. Chilton, something like that. Like a good hardworking like criminal psychologist, not just a showboater. Or I am not just some turnkey, Miss Starling. I wouldn't be like that. But I would love to
Well,
dive in.
good.
I would love to dive into those kinds of people's heads, and I try to in my normal life, even though I don't have a license to practice or whatever. I try to study, people like that because I find them very interesting.
Mhm.
Um, but in other words, that was a very formative film for me. Hannibal, I remembered seeing the posters for it and hearing about all the hype surrounding it, even though I was way too young to have seen Silence of the Lambs, let alone Hannibal. But I remembered that poster, and it really, haunted me in a good way. It stuck with me, and I remembered even my parents were very interested in it because they had seen Silence of the Lambs and they loved it back before they decided that everything, Hollywood or mainstream was terrible and evil and all that, back when they still had their sanity. But I remember it was in the air, even if I was too young to appreciate it. It was in the air, and then I remembered seeing a little bit of it on TV. I never finished it, and then finally saw the whole thing uncensored and everything. Um, I think it's
Another media
pretty.
resource center pick. Or
Actually, no, I think I might have seen it on either streaming, or I might have bought it as part of like the 3-pack. Like there was a 3-pack of all the ones that MGM had the rights to, which was Manhunter, Silence of the Lambs, and Hannibal.
Hmm.
Not Red Dragon because Universal has the rights to that.
Hmm.
But anyway, it was one of those two sources. I can't remember. I wasn't like forbidden from seeing it or anything. I just wanted to see it uncut because TV butchers movies like that.
Oh yeah.
Um, and I think that this film it's a different animal from Silence of the Lambs, and it illuminates a different aspect of the Hannibal Lecter character because Anthony Hopkins, who's a hero of mine in terms of acting and everything, he said it best when he said that Hannibal Lecter is at his most interesting when he is captured because he's like a tarantula in a bottle. And then when he's out of there, it's not as interesting, even though he did come back for this film. Um, I would agree with that, but I also think this illuminates a different aspect of his character that you could argue is kind of lost or not as emphasized in The Silence of the Lambs, which is that Dr. Chilton says it very accurately. He says, "Oh, he's a monster, a pure psychopath, so rare to capture one alive." And so in Silence of the Lambs, you see him behind the glass, and you're like, he seems pretty charming and polite and well mannered, well spoken, all that. And yeah, he does bite the face off the one guy, but it's like you see in this film, you really see the grotesquerie of this person in his full glory while he is also hiding in plain sight. Um, Plus, you see the grotesquerie that he leaves in his wake, namely with Mason Verger, and you see how that grotesquerie that's inflicted upon Mason Verger can spawn even more grotesquerie on the behalf of Mason Verger himself when he's trying to get his
Hmm.
revenge. He is a monster now in his own right.
Hmm.
So I think it really, whenever I think of this movie, I think of the word grotesque, and I mean that in a good way,
Hmm.
because
Yeah, I
too
mean that
often
in a good way.
I do. I mean, because too often the grotesque is lost on us, or we don't want to look at it or think about it. It horrifies us.
Hmm.
But I think this one really makes you look at the true depths of horror that's in Hannibal Lecter as a person and that's in Mason Verger in their own ways. And I think it's such that it's not necessarily as made as palatable as it was in The Silence of the Lambs because there they did a lot of stuff off camera or they did it implied and it was more about the thrill of the hunt and that kind of stuff, which was great for what it was trying to be. I think this is trying to be a different kind of movie. It's trying to emphasize
Right.
different things. It's less about catching a killer, even though that is what it's about, but it's more so about
It,
the it's more of like a dive. When Clarice Starling is brought to her seemingly lowest point, she has to kind of take a deeper dive into darkness, because it's not like Hannibal Lecter is captured. He's on the loose, and
right.
he's forcing her to confront aspects of herself. He's making her see, who is she really, what she really made of, and
Well,
so I think it's kind of that's what I'd say. It's a deep dive into the grotesque, and I think it works on that level. It's not as good as Silence of the Lambs, but I don't think it's the train wreck that people ever said it was at the
it
time.
it also is, and I'll agree with you, that's a little bit different in the sense that in the other two, they follow a fairly similar formula.
Yeah,
Strange Peg in the FBI, it deals with Lecter to try to bring down someone who's arguably an even bigger monster in a lot of ways.
yeah,
Certainly, the quote unquote Tooth Fairy and Buffalo Bill are
Yep.
both very peculiar and dangerous individuals who are clearly
Exactly.
off their rockers.
Oh yeah.
In this one, technically, they're still after such a killer, Hannibal.
Yeah.
But you could definitely argue that Mason Verger and even Paul Krendler are bigger villains in a lot of ways. And
Yeah. Well,
and
but what
Krendler's a
I
good example. Krendler's a good example of how evil can often wear the most banal face. I mean, he's just a government stooge, but
exactly.
he's not a good person in any way.
Well, and if anything, I think this film definitely has a lot more moral gray territory than even the other ones did. Because, like you said, it was always about consult this bad guy to catch another bad guy who's out on the loose. Um, which, for historical reference, Ted Bundy actually did that. You know, he was captured and he actually did aid the authorities in catching other serial killers.
Right.
He still got, electrocuted in the
Right.
electric chair, of course, but so it didn't redeem him in any way, but he still did it. But so that has a precedent. But with Hannibal Lecter, I think Hannibal Lecter is clearly the big bad guy of this film. He's clearly the antagonist, but in that you also see the depths of depravity in the so-called good guys. And you see just what all Hannibal Lecter brings out in them, and that also makes Clarice Starling shine even more. And he even says it towards the end that something to the I can't remember the exact line, but it's something to the effect of like looking for goodness in the world. All you'd have to do all you need is a mirror, because he sees her as like this paragon of goodness and virtue that even someone like him cannot bring down. And that's a noticeable changeover from the book, which I have to admit I have not read yet, but I will. Which I know that in the book they kind of fall in love and end up together in a weird sense. But like here, it's not really that way, but you can tell that there is a shared intimacy that they have that cannot really be explained by rational means. And that was all over all over the Silence of the Lambs, and it's brought even more to the forefront because it's like she wants to bring him in for the sake of justice, but I don't think she wants him dead necessarily, because he's able to see things in her that no one else can, and he doesn't want her coming after him for survival reasons, but he doesn't want to kill her because he sees her as this good person, this force for good.
At the end of the Silence of the Lambs, there's that great moment where they're talking together, and he says to her, "I have no plans to call on you, Clarice, because I think the world is a more interesting place with you in it.
Yeah.
Take care to extend me the same courtesy."
Yeah.
And she kind of did for a good long while.
Yeah, which I think that's like the closest that he and Anthony Hopkins has even said this, that it's the closest that he can really feel towards love of some kind, and I would agree with that. I think if anything, The Silence of the Lambs is a love story, but in the kind of in the kind of intellectual / respect sense of love, because it's these two people that by all accounts should despise each other, much like much like Edward Norton's
Will Graham and
Will Graham,
yeah.
Will Graham and Hannibal in that film, they fucking hate each other, and for good reason, but there, like, you get the sense that it's like Beauty and the Beast, basically. It's the Beauty and the Beast archetype. But point being that like this gets out of the strictures of that archetype just on its own and gets into a lot of the moral gray territory with the supposed good guys. So I like the film quite a bit. I don't think it's quite as thrilling as Silence of the Lambs, but I think it's really good for what it is.
Right. And then I just want to also interject one last thing about other villains. Dr. Chilton was definitely one of those monsters. But anyway, Forrest, what's your first take on this one?
All right. So I remember I remember wanting to see this when it came out, but my mom was reluctant to take me. And I could, like my dad wasn't around to take me either. So I had to wait. So although prior to that, I had read Silence of the Lambs. I don't remember, although I forget which one I saw first. If I saw this movie or Silence of the Lambs first. But eventually I did catch it on video, and I remember finding it very funny and finding it morbidly funny.
It has elements of that, for sure.
Definitely, yeah, definitely, especially to the dinner, the dinner scene, the final scene on the plane. Those parts just made me chuckle for how sick they were, sick they were, and or at least Ray Liotta in the dinner scene. But and yeah, but overall, although I have not given this one didn't have as much I mean, Silence of the Lambs I've watched multiple times. This one to me doesn't have as much. I mean, even for someone like me who loves like blood and guts, this does not have as much replay value as Silence of the Lambs. Like, this is probably maybe the second or third time in 20 years that I've watched this movie.
Well, it's not as tight. It's not as tight as the Silence of the Lambs, and it also is. I think if there's one criticism I'd have of it, is that it can be a little on the long side, beyond even just tightness of pacing. Like, it's a little. It's objectively, it's kind of long relative to what it needs to be.
Right.
Yeah, it's not as. Yeah, it's definitely a lot. The pacing's a lot more. Is a lot slower than compared to Silence of the Lambs. I noticed that too on this recent rewatch.
But it's not trying to be the same movie. It's trying to be a different movie, I think.
Yeah, it's definitely very. Silence of the Lambs was a much more. I feel it was definitely a much more psychological or cerebral movie, whereas this one's definitely all very visceral. I think that's the word. And Julianne Moore. I'm a fan. I think she's a great, fantastic actress. And personally, I've always thought she was very sexy. But I think I agree that I think the issue is just coming off of she's coming off of like Jodie Foster in one of her most iconic roles. It was just too. I feel like the bar. I felt like the bar was just set too. They set the bar way too high for her.
Yeah,
and she got screwed, which is unfair. Like you were saying, is unfair to her. It's unfair to her.
Yeah, she's not good when she's being put in the position of the other woman, as opposed to say we want Julianne Moore for what she brings to it.
I won't say she's not good, but this does suffer from it's a common thing with sequels and franchises.
But especially like sequels to like really good movies,
right?
I mean, look at Rocky versus the Rocky sequels,
right?
Yeah.
A good example, I guess, is the furor that everyone gets worked up into every time they announce a new Bond. Think about it. It's when you've got a role that people are used to, or they see one role or one person, and then you've got to get used to a new person in that role. And especially one like this where the same people play Lecter and Barney. It would have been nice to have full continuity, but it wasn't going to happen. So you can't really blame the actress. You can't really. It's just unfortunate circumstance.
Exactly.
But it is annoying. As a viewer, I always find it annoying.
Well, and that's why I want to make it clear that it's not, at least for my taste, it's not bad-mouthing Julianne Moore herself. Because honestly, I think performance-wise, she does a really good job. And if anything, she illuminates a different side of Clarice Starling, someone who has seen 10 years worth of horrors that are not related to serial killers necessarily. She's
still being haunted by those horrors.
Exactly. And like, I think one of the most effective parts of the movie is, for me, what really kind of disturbs me, and it's one that people probably don't talk about, it's that opening shootout where there's like a child at risk.
Yes.
And it's
Yeah.
like a baby or something. And I'm like,
Yeah.
that to me is the most horrific part of the movie, just because like with serial killers, by the sheer numbers, there are not a lot of them, and there have never been a lot of them because it's an abnormal crime. That's the whole thing. It's the abnormal crimes unit or whatever.
Right.
There are not that many serial killers, and there have never been that many. But
Yeah.
all over the world, there are children in peril, particularly from gunfire of some kind of in some form or fashion, whether it's
Right.
civil war, whether it's guerrilla warfare, whether it's crime, whatever. That's a much more real peril, and that to me was the most disturbing part of the film, because serial killers, there's not that many of them. You can kind of glamorize them in a weird way,
Right.
but that a child being in peril due to gunfire is very tragically all too real and all too common.
Right.
And
I think it's
the
AIDS
thing about
blood
that
splattered
very
all over
beginning,
it, which is never good.
Exactly.
the thing about that very beginning scene is the fact that when she came into the crime, there was another sheriff there that was
One
saying,
other
"Hey,
agent.
this is my territory. I'm in control here."
Yeah.
And he's the one who, even though everybody said stand down, he was like, no, everybody stay on target.
Right.
Apparently in real life, that kind of, because I at first I kind of thought that whole like law enforcement territoriality thing, I always thought that was like a conceit of the movies. Apparently that is a real thing.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
Yep.
And it
aided a lot of serial killers back in
you're
the
a
day
cop,
too,
nobody
because they
likes
didn't want to
that.
share information.
Yeah, well, and
Right.
apparently it pervades every aspect of law enforcement, which is pretty crazy.
Right.
I
So,
like
Forrest,
how
do
she
you have
looks kind
any
of like a
more?
dinosaur when she's crying afterwards. She's got like a face going on, and it's pretty crazy.
But
That's all
well,
I have to
actually,
add.
I was reminded very quickly. We mentioned Ridley Scott and everything.
Right.
Forgot the screenwriter Ted Talley did not return, which is too bad
No,
because
and
he won an Oscar. But this has some heavyweight champions in the screenwriting world working on it. It's got David Mamet, and who's even more of a heavyweight in the playwriting world,
right.
and Steven Zalian, who wrote Schindler's List. So I mean, these are not lightweights by any means, and we got Hans Zimmer on the music. Who also does a great job. So it's like, despite
Well, he does all of Ridley Scott's movies.
yeah, well, but point being, despite only having Anthony Hopkins and only having the guy who played Barney, they're the only ones who come back. Despite all of that, these are not lightweights. We have them their props.
Well, I'm going to make a note real quick on Mamet, and that is that I could not recognize his fingerprint on this movie. And from what I read, his draft was all but abandoned in favor of Zalian's.
Yeah.
He's basically given credit. He did write a couple of drafts, but his contribution barely made it into the film, apparently. So that's kind of a shame, because Mamet is a phenomenal wordsmith, and a little heavy on the foul language, but he's still good with. He's a great screenwriter. But I do want to go ahead. I do want to finish this part of it up. So let's let Forrest finish his part.
Yeah, go ahead.
If he has any more.
I gotta say. Well, I mean, yeah, I agree. Like a lot of even though it's not quite. It's not Silence of the Lambs. There's still a lot of there. Everybody involved in this movie is just a lot of. There's a lot of phenomenal talent. I think it's I guess it's, better than the sum of its parts, I guess is the word, or is the phrase for this to describe it. But Gary Oldman, I think, was definitely the other standout in this movie. He was fantastic.
If anything, I'd have liked to have seen more of him, because I thought he was just that good, and his the facial makeup on him was, talk about grotesque. I thought that
should have. I feel like that should have got. I mean, did that get? Did that get any nominations or anything. I feel like that should have gotten at least gotten some sort of an Oscar, some sort of nomination.
There was no love from the Oscars for this one, but there were several, like the Fangoria Chainsaw Awards gave the Anthony Hopkins and Hans Zimmer won. It was nominated for actress, supporting actor for Giancarlo Giannini, best makeup, strangely enough, and worst film, and best wide release film. It was up for best wide release and worst film, both from the same group.
How the hell does that make any sense? That's just ludicrous.
Yeah, but I think it's a crime that the makeup this did not at least warrant an Oscar nomination for makeup.
Mm-hmm.
Agreed.
Especially because the makeup category famously loves to swing for the fences. Like they have put
actually, I think it's a travesty that this got snubbed. I'm sorry, but I think it's a travesty that this got snubbed, but Norbit got nominated.
That's what I was going to say. Yeah. They have nominated some truly crap films in the makeup category.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's kind of interesting and weird.
It is.
But,
yeah. I know that you, Dane, have said that Silence of the Lambs was a love story. I think both of these have been a love story of sorts, and it continues in Hannibal. But definitely. It's more of a psychological. Because there are some conversations that men and women can have that are of a. They can be orgasmic in by nature, and to be honest, I feel like this is one of those relationships where it is stimulating to see the interactions between Clarice Starling and
I feel like this is one of those conversations, or at least it just became one.
So, so Forrest, we could have, we can say maybe you can be added to the chorus that I have been part of for 20 years. And why did the Academy fall all over itself for Moulin freaking Rouge?
Yeah.
Because the makeup nominees that year were Lord of the Rings, Fellowship of the Ring. I'll give it that. That was the winner.
Yeah.
A Beautiful Mind. I give it that.
Right.
And Moulin Rouge. So, yeah, I would have picked this over Moulin Rouge. I will give you that.
Yeah. Well, Moulin Rouge, there's a lot about it that I enjoy overall. I think it's
enjoyable, but it's a
travesty
that it took a Best Actress nod away from Naomi Watts for Mulholland Drive.
Yeah,
she should have gotten that. But anyway,
I would agree.
I want to get this. I want to move through that. So I'm going to say for my opening, I have long been a fan of Silence of the Lambs. I'm not sure if I was as young as Dane said he was when I saw it, but it was close. It might have been that long ago. I think I was I want to say I was in 7th grade the first time I saw it. It was a long time ago. And I've always loved the movie. It was in my top 5 for a while, and it's probably still in my top 10. I'm not positive, but it's definitely a top tier movie. So when I heard about this one, and by the way, Dave, you picked the absolute worst scene of the film to put as your background. But anyway,
that makes me hungry.
We'll get to that in a moment. But
hey, it's just to tell you who the brains in this outfit.
I wouldn't say that guy was not by any means. At any rate, he did lose his head though. When I heard about this one, I was stoked. I was like, yeah, they got a Silence of the Lambs sequel. I gotta see that. I'm there. And when I even before the film came out, I heard about some of the behind the scenes stuff and some of how Jodie Foster had left the project. I believe even at the time they were reporting that she pretty much left in disgust. She was not a fan of Starling's story in the novel. And she was not a fan.
None of them were Ted
Right.
Tully, Jonathan Demme, or
Right.
Jodie Foster. They all said this is
Right.
not the movie that we made.
Even Anthony Hopkins expressed some reservation about it. And they
Yeah.
tried. They did, like I said, at least 15 drafts of the screenplay before Foster quit. And I think Dem held on maybe for another one or two drafts after that. And I'm not sure at what point in that process Tally dropped out. I'm not sure at what point in the process Mamet came and went. I really don't know. But I do know that this was one where when the book came out, fans were divided. A lot of people who'd been waiting for the book read it and went, "What the hell?"
Yeah.
And so it was a very controversial book. I remember all this because I was looking forward to it. I still have not gotten around to reading the books myself.
Neither have I.
Want to. I need to. What's that?
I said neither have I.
I will
always
though.
think to.
I
So
read it.
those of you who have, I'll be interested in hearing your takes as we go along. But at least once we get to the part where it diverges significantly from the novel. But for the time being, I was interested. I wanted to see it. I did see it in theaters. I cannot recall for the life of me who with. It might have been on my own, or I feel like it was with people. What's that?
I do know that Ray Liotta's character
Uh-huh.
as agent was a hell of a lot more of an asshole in the book than he was.
Okay.
So they did dumb his character down a little bit, even though I know you got a lot of that assholeness on screen.
Oh,
but,
yeah.
But he was definitely more saying some more sexy shit to Clarice Starling in the book, and a little bit more of a pig.
Mm-hmm.
So he's full-blown chauvinist.
Which we talked about on the show yesterday with our dear Brandon, who we sadly missed tonight. We're talking a little bit about female empowerment and all, and when it works, when it doesn't. I've always been a massive fan of Clarice Starling as a character, precisely because that's an example of female empowerment done about as well as I've ever seen it done, because she speaks to the struggles of women in professions where certainly at the time, I don't know, and probably still even today, I don't know the stats, but for sure at the time, were not a lot of women were in the FBI, and certainly not in that kind of dark special crimes or unit territory or whatever. So she faces a lot of, if not outright sexism, she faces a lot of just exclusion and a lot of, like there's that great shot in Silence of the Lambs where she goes in the elevator and Jodie Foster, who is not a very tall person or whatever, she's by far the shortest in the elevator, and she like demonstrably so. So she's the small one. She's the one who has always been the small one. And so, you talk about female empowerment, you show this person who persists through that struggle by being not only competent, but by having that right blend of assertiveness, but also manners. Because she's not like mean about it whatsoever, but she knows how to get what she wants by simply just, doing the job. And here you see someone that has clearly been through 10 years worth of shit, not just from the people around her who are part of that kind of tight-knit law enforcement male mentality, but then they're also the horrors of the world that are weighing on her. And the fact that the only person who saw her for who she truly was and remains, that person is out on the loose, and he happens to be, a truly evil person, as we see in the story. But again, that's how you do female empowerment really well, and how you create a really rich character with an even richer, character relationship between hero and villain, where one of the one makes the other better at what they do.
Well, actually, that does. Before I go back to I'll go ahead and put this to the ones who've read the book. There were, I think, a couple of other characters who I think one of the disappointments, perhaps, with this one, Foster's known for doing like the strong female having to deal with some, and in the original, the other character who really comes across as a really great guy, decent character, he only has a couple of scenes. But I always really liked Barney, and
Me too.
I feel like he came across as a little bit more of a scoundrel in this movie.
Yeah.
And it's kind of, I guess, without Dr. Chilton waiting in the wings, Chilton would make anyone look decent.
Well,
Almost. Like, he knew as horrid a piece of work as Miggs was.
Yeah.
I never thought he was as bad as I think Chilton is. I really didn't. And
Miggs was at least honest with his scumbaggery.
Yeah, I mean, but that's the thing. Next to that, Barney looked like a saint. So it's kind of
all he did was sell a bit of murderabilia, though. He wasn't really doing anything that wrong, and like he said, they probably would have chucked it, or someone else would have taken it and sold it.
He wasn't doing anything horrible. And when Clarice came sniffing around, he offered stuff to her, which was, good and decent of him.
Yeah.
But still,
I think what that's meant to represent, I think, is a key theme of the film, which is that even the good guys are not all that good, or rather, they're not spotless.
Right. Nobody's perfect. Exactly.
Well,
but
the
other one who,
just for reference, I think it was Mo, murderabilia or whatever. That's a real thing. That is a real thing. And
I know several people who
make good money from that.
Go to the Museum of Death in L.A.
Yeah, people make good money.
People have this weird fixation on collecting crazy stuff, and of course, we'll we see a little bit of that in Tusk. I'm sure you might mention that later. But the other one I want to ask the people who read the book. I've always kind of wondered this, and when I watched it again, the one I was watching with asked this point blank, and that is one person who did show Clarice some actual support, whether or not they had pure motives in doing so, is hard to say. But was Jack Crawford even mentioned in the book?
No. He had actually passed away.
He had passed away
some years back,
but that was mentioned. So that was something that I wondered if it was maybe in early drafts of the screenplay and it just got kind of written out over the years. But I don't think they ever mentioned it in the movie. And so it does leave an open-ended question of, he was such a booster for her early on. Why has she been thrown to the wolves since then? Which she kind of has.
Well, she's kind of a woman on her own. In a sense, while she's going through this whole thing, which is why she gets when she gets sacked, and she gets sacked twice.
That's what I'm saying. You get the strong impression. You get the strong impression that this has been going on for a long time, and that the fish market scene was the kind of the straw that broke the camel's back, as it were. Like they were looking for an excuse, basically.
Well,
and so I was just kind of curious if you guys had any more background from the book, because the movie really doesn't give you that. So
Ray Liotta's character as that agent, when he mentioned that in that dinner scene that he was running for Congress, it goes into that a little bit more as well in the novel. The fact that he is actually like buddy with some of these like presidential candidates, and he's basically being a runner-up for like someone who might actually run for Congress eventually.
Okay.
So it delves into that a little bit more, but like Clarice said, there has been a few moments where he has hit on her, you know.
Oh yeah.
And she told him no, and that whole scene where she's like, well, he's like, well, if you play along with me, Starling.
You also get the impression or I got the impression from the movie, and I don't know if anyone else will disagree with me, but that part at the beginning where they're basically sitting around the table, giving her what for, basically for her role. You know, they're all basically scapegoating her in mass, like they're all doing it. You get the impression in the movie that was her first meeting with him. And it might not have been, but that's the impression I got from the movie.
It was
I thought you could read it both ways. I mean, she is staring right at him for like a length of time, but you could read that as she doesn't know this dude. Like, what the fuck's he doing here? Or that she's like, man, I really wish this dude wasn't here. You know,
it's kind of like their first meeting in years.
Okay.
Because years ago when she first started out on the force, there was a party where she was at and he hit on her, you know, and she told him to go home to his wife, and he just so that's when she said, well, no means because I told you no is why you're being a dick, you know.
Right. You did. There was that part. Anyway, okay.
And there are moments that the camera does look at her legs, making it look like he is admiring her legs.
Oh, it's pretty clear he was. Well, and I can't fully disagree with him on that, you know. But anyway, now I will go ahead just to finish off. My first impression of this film was crushing disappointment. I mean, you know, I went into it knowing that it was going to be not what I had necessarily hoped for, because it had gotten such blowback from the fans. And I didn't take to Moore's performance at first. I thought she felt a little miscast, a little kind of since then, I have seen quite a few of her roles and gotten to know her as an actress. And I think when I saw it this time, I actually thought she did a very good Clarice Starling, especially with that 10 years of crap she's had to put up with. But she's still not Jodie Foster. And like I said, that is always, when it comes to first impressions, that's always going to be an issue for me. If there's a cast change and I notice it, I usually do, but I don't always.
My biggest question in return is if Jodie Foster had reprised the role, would she have been able to pull enough guff to be that kind of weathered 10-year veteran?
Absolutely. Jodie Foster can play almost anything you give her. She is a phenomenal actress.
Yeah.
I think the biggest thing, when I rewatched it, the biggest difference between the two portrayals is that this kind of is a different Clarice Starling. And I can see why Jodie Foster was put off by the role, because it's a very thankless role, which could be seen as an actor's challenge. And, you know, that could be someone could come at it and go, okay, I'm going to take this person who is pretty much this person that we've all grown to love over the last few years, who got the bad ending, if you will. And now we get to watch what happens because of that. I I don't think that's where I wanted to see with the character. I also agree with the idea that Hopkins was more fun locked up. He is more fun, not
Yeah.
Hopkins. He is, but Lecter. It's fun seeing him in the wild, but it was more fun seeing him locked up. Where
Yeah.
all he had was his wit. You know what I mean? Like
Here's one thing about Anthony Hopkins' performance that I do in all of the various times he's ever played Hannibal Lecter. He does this very specific thing that I don't think people realize, but
what's
it's
that?
very key to the character. When Hannibal Lecter is locked up, he has a very specific intonation in his voice. It comes across as incredibly mocking and very snide. And then when he's out in the wild, he sounds very noble, like Anthony Hopkins does in real
Like,
life. Yeah,
I like how he
he-
sounds when he's talking to Giancarlo,
yeah,
and he's like, "I'm giving very serious thought to eating your wife."
Yeah, he
yeah.
gets a little bit of it back when he's about to
That
sink
was
into someone, so to
Well,
speak.
what I mean by that,
that was my favorite line from the movie. It was the one part I kind of remembered the first time I saw it, and I remembered it this time. But that may be the difference between Zalian and Tally. But you're probably right that he probably, again, when he's locked up, all he has is his wit, and he
yeah,
has oceans of wit that he can draw on. And when he's out in the wild, he doesn't need it as much.
yeah. Well, but
So,
it's a
yeah,
very deliberate choice on
right,
behalf of Anthony Hopkins, where
right.
I like to call that Hannibal's kind of outside voice versus his inside voice, because when he's outside in the world, and you even see it in Silence of the Lambs, like you can hear it. There's a very noticeable change, like when he's calling Clarice Starling on the phone, you hear like the British eloquence of Hannibal of Anthony Hopkins. You hear that on the phone, and then when he's behind bars, he's a lot more overtly mocking of everyone.
And
Um,
sinister. He's like the intellectual version of a caged tiger or something.
yeah, well,
That's really frustrated with being in the cage. It's waiting
exactly.
to chomp at you through the bars at any minute. Except
Well,
he has to do it verbally because
and
there's no bars.
actually,
There's just little holes.
and funny you say that, because Anthony Hopkins, performance-wise, he based his portrayal on animals, specifically a tarantula and lizards. He based them on those, and you can see that all throughout the film, like when his nostrils will flare at specific instances, and also like just the way he looks in the camera, and his voice is again really snide, very mocking when he's inside, and then when he's outside, he sounds a lot more eloquent and a lot more polite, even more so than when he's inside. And he already was pretty polite on the inside when he was inside. But that's to me, that's really key to the character, because you see that all over the place in here, where he is on the outside and he's using his outside voice for the whole thing, because he's able to hide in plain sight, and he's able to show the cultured side of himself that he tries to show inside but is unable to do so fully, because you get the sense that that's the guy he's really trying to be, and that is a big part of who he is, but he also just has that side of him that is so okay with eating people that he finds very lesser than him, or very like worthy of mockery, because he does definitely have a his own twisted kind of moral code to who he eats and how and why and all that stuff, and it does kind of come across as very mocking of the status quo and of the people who occupy power. That's always been his MO. If you've ever seen the rest of the movies and stuff, that he tends to go after people who he finds to be kind of beneath contempt in some way.
I kind of
Right.
got a kick out of Gary Oldman's character, or
Okay.
with Mason.
Okay, pause real quick. Okay, we're already an hour in and we haven't even finished first impressions because we keep going into. No, it's not fun. I'm sorry. We
it's
must
great.
finish first impressions, and then I promise we'll go headlong into character. Okay.
Which we already
So,
kind of have, but it's all right.
This one actually has a lot more, for me, backstory than just the first one, which is that I think that we ought to, for this month, tie in how it ties into our home states. You know, that's part
Yes.
of the
Right.
reason for the theme this month. And of course, Hannibal was filmed all over the map. There are scenes filmed at the Biltmore in North Carolina. There are scenes filmed in Florence. There are scenes, I believe, in DC and probably a couple other places. But there are scenes that were filmed at Smith Mountain Lake. Apparently, Ray Liotta Krendler's house is apparently the same one they used in What About Bob, which is pretty cool. And there are multiple scenes filmed in the Langley, Arlington general area and in the Richmond area. And I actually attended a casting call for this film. It was one of the reasons why it came immediately to mind to me, because I was like, well, I know they filmed it in Virginia because they were casting here.
Well, and they filmed a whole bunch in Italy, of course.
Right.
Yeah.
But so it's kind of I just want to go ahead and throw that out there, is that it's not a purely Virginia project, but it definitely is a decent one for our state because they did film it at a few different sites in the state. And
story-wise, the Hannibal Lecter films / books / shows, they've been very heavily Virginian / Maryland because they're in the Washington D.C. vicinity, and
the Silence of the Lambs had scenes filmed as well in the Arlington area, as well as I think they did film the West Virginia scenes in West Virginia, I think.
Yeah. Well, not only that, but it's like we had several things for sure in Silence of the Lambs. You had Hannibal's practice having been in Baltimore, but then you had Quantico being in Virginia, so they're all within that kind of the orbit of Washington D.C.
Right. So, and actually, totally weird, random tie-in while I'm thinking about it, of Virginia films. A film that's mostly DC set but had other scenes filmed elsewhere in Virginia was The Contender, which was a film that featured a great Gary Oldman performance and featured William Peterson, the original Will Graham, as the governor of Virginia, and those scenes were filmed in Virginia. So that was kind of cool. But anyway, totally random aside. But I'm going to, again, my first impression of this was crushing disappointment, but I've seen it, I think, once since then, and this may be the third time. It's been years since I've seen this one. I agree with Forrest that the rewatchability of the first film is much higher. I think the rewatchability of Red Dragon was higher. Partly due to Ray Fiennes' phenomenal performance.
Oh, yeah.
And Manhunter was a good solid one too. So that's enough of that. We'll go and do a very basic. We did the basic plot per IMDb, but basically, I think we'll go ahead and from here, if the character performance, character stuff comes up as we go, we'll do it like, I'm going to try to do a quick version of the plot, trying to hit some of the beats, and you guys can mention anything that I skip that you like. But the opening scene, is that fish market scene, and you've got the whole thing where you've got the opening scene is the one with Mason Verger. I'm sorry about that. Where you see Barney sitting there with a package, and they're having their discussion. And this is your introduction to Verger, who is an unrecognizable Gary Oldman.
Yeah, and of course, you can't really see him underneath all that makeup.
And you got Frank.
You can't really hear him either because he adopts a very specific voice that is pretty inimitable.
It kind of reminded me a little bit of American Elephant Man with the sort of
Little
little
bit.
slurping, rasping a little bit. I think there
Which
was some. I don't know if that was intentional on his part or a side effect of the makeup or
It's
whatever.
probably both, because good makeup tends to affect and direct performances.
Right.
But and also because if he were to have that kind of facial deformity, he probably would have a hard time speaking. But one of the aspects to Mason Verger as a character that I think is pretty important is that yes, he's a victim of Hannibal Lecter's cruelty, but he is also a child molester who
Right.
also
Yeah,
happens to
straight
be
up
insane.
scumbag.
But he also happens to be insanely wealthy, so therefore he's
Yes.
been able to evade justice largely. But
Yeah.
true to the real psychology of child molesters, his voice, the voice that he adopts, has something of a childlike quality to it, which I really thought was critical to the character, because generally that's why a lot of child
Mhm.
molesters, that's why they tend to do what they do, because there's this part of them that's stuck in a state of arrested development, and it kind of
It's almost playful.
metastasizes. Yeah, but it metastasizes into, the worst kind of abuser that you can imagine. But it has
Right.
its genesis in something having gone wrong in childhood and them kind of mentally still being stuck in there someplace. And so the voice that he uses there, I think, was pretty critical for the character, and it helps inform much of what he does going forward, because he still has a lot of servants. He's still seemingly a product of his family's name and his wealth and his ability to hide from the rest of the world, the consequences of the rest of
In
the
a
world.
sense, he's very much set up like Lincoln Rhymes in The Bone Collector.
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
That one actually.
But yeah, that's important though, because that helps inform what's to come.
Right. And then of course, the actually I started watching actually, Dave, that was when I was getting ready to text you about our start time. I was curious if we were running late because I was watching some of the commentary track with Ridley Scott talking about the film. And in this scene, he talked about this scene being moved to the front of the film as a way to introduce Verger where he's not being particularly monstrous, where you just get to learn a little bit about him and his, his collection of murderabilia, I guess, as you guys. But he's not being particularly monstrous here. You get to see what Barney's up to. You get to see the mask from the first film, which is Scott pointed out is a nice little callback to the film. And he
Iconic
also
too.
points out, yeah,
Yep.
exactly. And he pointed out the presence of Dr. Cordell Demling, who's played by Jelko Ivanek, great character actor, who does a good job here. But as Scott points out, you don't really know right away exactly what his role is. Doctor, manservant, butler. He's that guy who's in the scene, but but it is sort of a nice oblique intro to all three of them in the film in a way that might not have landed as well later in the story. So I think that is kind of a nice way of looking at it. You don't go straight into that action scene like I was about to. You get
Well,
a
it's
little
also a good way to
pause.
set up the grotesqueness, because the very
Exactly.
first thing you see in the movie is a dude who looks fucking disgusting, even if he's not being disgusting.
Yeah.
Well, I think the
So it's
first
like,
thing you see is a location shot, isn't it, of the estate?
Yeah, the
Which
Biltmore.
maybe, yeah, and then it does that weird
Yeah.
zooming up, but also like zooming into the aspect ratio thing when it pans up to them sitting there talking, which I thought was like neat.
Which is a nice thing. I never really got to visit the Biltmore, but I've been through Asheville, and I know there's pamphlets for it in every place you go in North Carolina. And
It's a pretty
which
place. I've
almost
been there.
well, it's
which
considered
almost
like the largest private dwelling in the U.S., I believe, or something like that.
I think that's right. It's
Yeah,
been used for a ton of movies and shows and
I
stuff,
saw it was
because
used for Richie Rich.
Yeah.
That aspect ratio going into a scene kind of reminds me like as if you're seeing it from Barney's point of view, as
Yeah.
if he were sitting
Or something,
inside,
right?
inside of a security, a vault, and you're just seeing like one of these videotapes that Hannibal Lecter has stored away somewhere,
Right.
It was strange, dude. I mean, it's like it would have been a fine shot just panning up to him, but the way that they did that strange, like, zooming it in thing until it was the full picture, I thought was just neat.
Right.
I do love in the opening credits there, you see the pigeons form Hannibal's face briefly. That's so cool.
And Scott talked about how that was one of the people on the crew had filmed that entirely on their own as a potential sort of like trailer or something for the film.
Yeah.
And they never used it. But Scott was like, I like this. I want to, let's make it the opening sequence. But it is
I remember it all right.
Do that. So then you do go into the fish market scene, where, as we said before, you got that one guy. Who was the guy? Was it Pearsall who was being a total jerk, or I can't remember.
I don't know. The two dudes looked kind of the same, and I'm not sure which one of them died. Because at the end, I was like, oh, it's just that other vague blonde dude laying there. Like, which one of them is it?
He had a couple of other agents, and there was some territorial sniping between them and Starling, and it was blatantly obvious that one of them
you realize I'm in charge?
Right, exactly. There was one of them who was blatantly disrespecting her, probably because she was a woman, and he was the one who opened fire and just ruined the entire sting. And it was, of course, I can't remember if he was the one who was killed in the or if it was the other guy.
Right?
But I lost track, but it was like what?
He was like local PD, I think is what it was, And they wanted to look tough on crime locally, so that's why he was so gung-ho to like go forward with it anyways.
So he was the local Barney Fife, basically. And so, just like what would have happened if Barney Fife had ever worked with the FBI in a drug bust.
I think the shootout would have been a lot more comedic, for one thing.
Actually, I think it was a joint operation with the local PD and the DEA, so I think the other agent must have been the DEA head or whatever.
Well, the whole thing was a cataclysmic fuck up, such that Clarice got blamed for it, and thus, that gives her the motivation to want to, track down this Hannibal Lecter to kind of, get her good name back.
That gave her superiors the motivation to saddle her with that.
Exactly.
That plus the implication that Verger called Krendler or someone who got in touch with him, and that he sort of dangled this, we have new information on Lecter thing.
Yeah.
Mainly, you get the impression that it was more so that he could just meet Starling and size her up, I guess.
Which typical manipulator behavior. He knows how to work. Mason Verger knows how to work people. He knows how to use his wealth to get what he wants, and also how to dangle something enticing before the eyes of the person that he wants to control in some form.
Now, I do want to mention very briefly, I'm looking through the cast list here. I'm not going to say the name live, but I was extremely amused to hear the name of one of my former employers mentioned among the agents. But it was, I heard that and I just saw it here on the cast list and I'm like, okay. But at any rate, so yeah, things are looking pretty sad for Starling. Is this when we flip to Florence and see what Lecter's up to? I'm trying to remember.
It might be the first time. Yeah, I think we get the dinosaur crying where she's like, and then we have that
to
Lecter over there.
I think they call it an ugly cry.
Yeah, she's a beautiful woman, but man, she's got that ugly cry face. Lots of people have an unfortunate crying face. I think most of us do, but
Right.
it's always unfortunate to see someone cry. But there's times where people go full ham with it, and it's like, calm down with those neck veins. Like,
Yeah.
put that away, dial it back a little bit.
So so we had so when we meet Lecter in Florence, he is working essentially as
An art professor.
Library curator.
As a library or like he's, I guess, sort of actively auditioning for the role, if you will.
Mhm.
And I think the implication there is that he himself had retired the previous individual.
Mm-hmm.
And
Hey, he packed up his stuff for him with an inventory, though.
Exactly, it was very polite of him, very polite and helpful.
Yeah. Which,
I like how he's
Hannibal's
blatantly fucking creepy.
I like his
he's
comment
not a very
as-
smooth operator.
I like
Right.
his comment as he was given taking the suitcases down with Giancarlo's character.
Yeah.
Jeez, these are heavy as bodies.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Dude, and I like when I mean, that's so obvious, and he's being super creepy leading up to that. But even in that opening scene with him at like the library or the college or whatever, he's just being blatantly creepy with that cop. That cop is like, whoa, this dude's kind of, what the fuck? And he has no reason to suspect he's Lecter at that point. He just thinks he's a creepy fucking librarian,
And this is the cop, of course, is Giancarlo Giannini, who is a very solid actor who's been around for a good
he's
long
always
time.
a treat.
Right. And
Some
he
quality
plays
about him,
Inspector Rinaldo Pazzi, which I love the way that name makes him sound more than a little bit like Patsy.
Yeah.
But it also Lecter very pointedly shares some local history with him of his ancestor who was hanged. And talk about some foreshadowing there, but that was it was some pretty creepy stuff to say to someone you just met.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
for sure.
he definitely likes to push people to their limits and to kind of make. I mean, that's really honestly that is the crux of Hannibal Lecter, even beyond eating people and that kind of stuff. I think at his core, he's someone who does kind of what I try to do with people, which is to kind of make them think about who are they really. Get past all of the artifice, all the bullshit, all of the things that people surround themselves with to hide from who they really are. He tries to cut through all of that and get people to ask themselves, like,
it's like when he was
what
in
are
the
you
clink,
really
he got
made of?
addicted to making people emotionally vulnerable, So he just immediately tries to break down their walls with some like uncomfortable shit,
Well, he's really able to, just like a knife, he's able to cut right through and get to the heart of what makes them tick. And part of that is he's a good psychiatrist, a good, therapist. But also it's because I think on some level, his whole reason for being is that the people who are real, who are being true to who they really are, earn his respect in some ways. And then the people that are not, that are full of shit, like Dr. Chilton, he hates Dr. Chilton because he's, dishonest. He's, not at all what he pretends to be. And I think that's really what
takes
gets
away his
him.
books and shit.
That too, but I think that really gets to him, and it gets to me too. I mean, I relate a lot to Hannibal Lecter on a lot of levels, in terms of my personality, and that's an area that I think I share a lot in common with, because I always try to, as much as I can, I try to get to the heart of what makes people tick, and try to get them to ask themselves, who are you really? Because if you're able to do that, then you're able to get people to be introspective and to hopefully live in a more honest fashion.
And it is worth noting that I don't know how deeply they go into this on either of the first two films, but I feel like with Red Dragon, they got into. I remember there was a dinner sequence with Lecter where he was still a psychiatrist. But they do mention, at least briefly, throughout the films, that he was a respected psychiatrist, and
Yeah.
it's for good reason. He did know how to read people, and he did know how to understand and discuss with them, even though he is in very many ways a sociopath and by definition can't fully get it.
Mhm. Well, and
He
actually,
gets it.
you'll notice that in all of the films, even
Mhm.
after he's captured, he gets stripped of his license to practice and all that.
Mhm.
They still call him Dr. Lecter,
Oh yeah.
and he actually, I think in some of the books and stuff, if I recall, he actually is able to still contribute to like psychiatry articles and to like culinary articles and stuff like that. So
Yeah.
he's still well
Mhm.
They kind of
respected in
mention it in
those
this book
fields.
too. Like
Yeah.
he's
Right.
got signed editions of like the Joy of Cooking and shit or whatever.
Right.
And I
Yeah.
think he was pretty good at helping them catch other killers even before, like, because in Red Dragon, I think he'd helped Edward Norton's character already
That's
catch one,
right.
didn't
Yeah.
he?
He did.
And well, and actually, the YouTuber I mentioned before, Rob Egger, who I really like, he did a whole big hour-long video dissecting Hannibal Lecter as a character, and he basically summed it up as he called Hannibal Lecter kind of an embodiment of the best and worst qualities that a human being can possess in
Mhm.
such a way that he is somewhat of a fantasy character, but he also, on the one hand, he's so cruel, so sadistic, so, able to kill in these horrible ways on the one hand, and then he can be really, really insightful, polite,
Mhm.
courteous, and even nurturing on the other
Mhm.
side. Because again, the journey that he sends Clarice on in Silence of the Lambs and this film, by all accounts, it helps her become the best version of herself that she can possibly be, which really is the goal of any psychiatrist, psychologist, therapist, whatever.
Mhm.
That's what their ultimate goal is, and he is able to do that for her by making her face her past trauma, which again, that is what a therapist is supposed to do.
Mhm.
So I think it's those contradictions in the fact that he has the dark side and the light side so strongly all together. I think that's what makes him so compelling and so continually insightful. Because there's in so many ways I want to be like Hannibal Lecter, and then in other ways, obviously, I don't. Um, but it's like as far as like being that intelligent, that able to cut to the heart of what makes people tick and hopefully make them see inside of themselves what was always there that can help better them in some way. That's
Wasn't
what
there a
I
short
want to
in like a
do.
movie you did called Cooking with Human Blood too?
Oh
Yes,
yeah.
which and that it did give me a fascination with the kind of
I'm sure
psychological
Lecter would have
slash.
enjoyed it.
Oh, most certainly. Hannibal Lecter was very much on my mind, but
Mhm.
that gave me a fascination with some of the kind of psychological aspects of different
Right.
parts of cannibalism, which are not at all lost on the Hannibal Lecter character. But yeah, that's you can tell it was a very formative film for
I'm
And
me. This,
fascinated with
it's
his hairline, bro, because if
oh
you've got
yeah,
that fucked up a hairline, but you could still look cool with it slicked back, that's like it's genetic, but
right.
it's
hmm
worth
Lecter
admiring.
Lecter is he is fascinating in that he is evil. He is a sociopath. He is
hmm
a nasty piece of work who delights in tormenting other people. What he did to Verger was downright sadistic,
hmm
but he does have those, yeah, that appreciation for the arts. He does have that respect for people who enjoy or practice basic politeness and human decency. Uh, so he has He really is. There's reasons why he's widely regarded as one of the great cinematic villains. I mean, he is pretty much on any short list of great villains. Usually you'll find Hannibal Lecter, and he really is too dark to be an anti-hero. He is more of a villain, but he's
a
not.
great one.
He is,
He's
but
like
he's in
he's
the
Shakespearean level,
yes.
and it's partially because he's played by one of the great Shakespearean
Well,
actors.
also, we were talking earlier about cast changes, and one thing that I've said before, I think we said it in the Batman discussion, that I consider those characters kind of Shakespearean because if you see different people take on the roles, it can be jarring at first, but if they do it well, you know, apparently when Foster, Talley, and Dem, Hopkins, I don't know what his take on Ted Talley dropping out was, but apparently he was reportedly heartbroken when Jodie Foster dropped out, and very disappointed when Deb dropped out as well. But he went ahead and took the role. But at first, the studio thought he might pass. They thought he might move along. And two names I saw floated that they were considering were John Malkovich and Tim Roth. I think either one of them would have been a fascinating Lecter. And then,
They
of
could
course,
have brought something else.
in Manhunter, you
I'd
had
put,
Brian
like-
Cox in the role, and Brian Cox did a great job.
Oh,
But
yeah.
it was a completely different take on the character.
Well, his was
completely
I gotta
different.
put like Danny DeVito just so I could shoot the scene where he bites the tongue out.
That would
I
have
think
been
that'd be
cool.
amazing.
That actually would have been pretty damn cool. I'm not even kidding.
Yeah.
Now
Yeah, no, neither am I.
Brian Cox, interestingly enough, his portrayal of Hannibal Lecter was based on a real life criminal named Peter Manuel, Scottish serial killer, and
I
so
thought he had a bit of a brogue.
well, he had a very specific person he was imitating, and he also played it more like someone you might meet behind bars. Like he had kind of shifty eyes. He was intelligent, but he also wasn't quite that kind of Shakespearean nobleman. So it's a different take. But I think that with Anthony Hopkins being as good of an actor as he is, and for elevating this person to the heights of human sophistication and achievement, and then the lowest of human cruelty and savagery, he covers all the bases, and he's the best of us and the worst of us all in one body, and I think that that's why he's so great, because he is us at our best and our worst all in one.
There is one character from a miniseries that I recently watched that kind of reminds me of Hannibal Lecter, and that is Andre Lenouge in The Storm of the Century.
Huh. I haven't seen
as
that
well,
since
dude.
it
That guy was
aired.
bone chilling.
I saw that
That's
when it
great.
aired, and it was good, but I don't even remember it.
Worth a revisit, man. If you can get that Stephen King pack that's got all his.
I think
TV
I have it in
stuff.
my collection. I'm just, but yeah. So anyway, where were we on the plot?
We were in the library scene still. The intro to Lecter in Spain.
So we're seeing a little bit. We've seen him with the inspector. The inspector thinks something's a little odd, but he can't put his finger on it. You see Clarice. I don't know if I'm skipping ahead, but you see Clarice reaching out. Oh, she gets the letter from Lecter. She gets an actual letter from him.
Well, to sum it up very basically, I mean, there's a lot of cat and mouse games between Hannibal, between the Italian inspector, between Clarice, and who all knows what at what time, and the inspector has to reach out to her to let him know that he thinks that this person is Hannibal Lecter.
Right.
He doesn't even do that. He's trying to get that reward.
Yeah. Because she gets the letter and then reaches out to Europe in general, because she's able to narrow the hand cream that she smells down to Europe.
She gets the surveillance tape.
And then the inspector happens across this and realizes, holy crap, this guy's one of the FBI's most wanted. So he, being the guy he is, decides, I'm going to get that reward for myself.
Which bizarrely, Verger has the pull to have his like weird private number listed.
Right.
No, he does a web search after the FBI one. He's like, I could do it through the normal channels and get this much. But then he finds out that there's like a $3 million private reward.
Right. They did say that Verger had him put back on the FBI's most wanted list. He had been off, and Verger got him put back on. So yeah, you have this whole thing. He can't
buy a senator, but he can rent one from time to time. You know?
Good line there. But yeah, so you have this whole thing where you have this greedy public servant in Florence who's trying to angle for this big reward and putting his life in danger, and also kind of cock-blocking Starling's investigation, if you will. And then, of course, Lecter's just kind of doing his thing, stringing the man along, and you get additional, dealings with seeing Verger trying to pull the strings and all this kind of stuff. And yeah, and eventually it does come to a head where Starling gets in touch with the guy and says, look, you don't know who you're messing with here.
Yeah, no shit.
He quickly learns why. I love that scene where he's called them about the pigs, Verger, and he's wearing those sweet shades, and he's like sitting out there on the veranda or whatever rich people call that shit. Yeah, and he's just like, oh, they sound wonderful. And he's got like this sweet, like fucking douchey rich guy laugh.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yes, indeed. You know who he also reminded me of? What's his name? Jeez, I'm drawing the guys the blank, but the guy who plays the mob boss in Snatch, Alan Ford, but Bricktop, he had a penchant for feeding people to pigs. And so that whole thing kind of reminded me of that guy.
Let's not forget the whole impetus for why Mason Verger wants to go after Hannibal Lecter because, Hannibal Lecter knew about his, predilection for children, but he also Hannibal was seemingly able to kind of feign an almost romantic attraction of sorts to Mason enough to get him. I forget if he was really drunk or on drugs, or I think it was on drugs.
He gave him a powder, which I've never been fully understood of what that is. It's like some old school fucking drug, like party favor, But in reality, Hannibal doesn't do anything to Verger. He just gets him high, and then he's like hands him a piece of glass and gives him a friendly suggestion that maybe you ought to try cutting your face off and feed it to dogs.
I think that's such a deliciously disgusting punishment for someone that I'm like, hey, a lot of points for creativity right there.
Yeah. And I love how when Verger is recounting the scene to Starling, he ends it with,
it seemed like a good idea at the time. Yeah.
Well, and there are some words that I remember from Mason that it was at the end here. It is like, isn't it funny how you could look at my face and yet when I mentioned the word God, you turned away.
Yeah.
That's very telling too.
Yeah, that was an interesting observation, there. And because in a very real sense, he is sort of a devil, and she has no problem with that. And
he's a fun dude, though, at the same time, Scumminess aside, like, he is a fun villain. I love how he's just relishing the idea of feeding him to these pigs, and he's got this whole elaborate scheme set up,
Well, I think the fact that he says that, the fact that because Clarice Starling is someone who, through what all she's seen, I don't think neither she nor Hannibal would really believe in God at this point, but I think that she wants to believe that there is some kind of a system of reward and punishment of some kind. So in other words, she's not really all that sold on the idea of like a benevolent overseer kind of god, but maybe more so in the, the bad people get punished kind of sense of right and wrong. And then Mason seems to be adhering to an idea of God in a kind of, rich New England blue blood goes to an Episcopal church kind of way. That's kind of how I got it. And I think Hannibal, apparently in the books, he has a much more kind of overtly anti-religious bent to him, as far as like finding it amusing when like a church has its roof ripped off via a storm, and it's full of worshipers and that kind of stuff. So he has a kind of appreciation for some of the,
Let's ask our
grotesqueries.
Harris scholars here.
Well, I have actually only read Red Dragon.
Oh, okay.
There's that.
Well, because
but
I know it's.
Speaking
I know
of storms,
that's
I really like that line in the letter where he calls Clarice's parents tornado bait white trash or trailer trash. Just the tornado bait part of that made me laugh so fucking hard when I noticed it this time.
Yeah. Wait, Dave, you're about to say something?
No, I forget.
Well, so we have this pivotal scene not long after Starling has warned Patsy, where he goes to, Lecter is giving a lecture on basically the history of hangings in art, like talking about a long tradition of art and death and hanging.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And
again,
hanging specifically, and how sometimes they got the guts out, sometimes no.
Exactly. And then, of course, right before he hangs Patsy, he asks, "Bowels in or out?" But there is that part where he is acting the part of a scholar, but there is that very morbid focus on his scholarship there.
Well, and the thing is, though, if you do your research into art and history, he's absolutely right on the money. I mean, the grotesque has been an element in classical art for centuries, and
there's a reason why they just take the wood cuttings and use them as black metal covers.
And look no further than just the history of our own country, let alone the history of the world, and you see all manners of horrors being visited upon human beings in the name of good government and that kind of stuff.
I've always found it quite amusing, talking about classical art, some of the things that are depicted in classical art that you study from, elementary school. And then you look at it and you're like, well, if I looked at modern art that depicted this exact same thing, it would be not suitable for children.
Yeah. Well, it's the old, people taking their dicks out. There's the classical painting
everywhere in that stuff.
Well, there's the classical painting, The Rape of the Sabine Women. It's rape, but it's a classical painting.
Of course, there's nothing wrong with that because it's
some ancient pervert fucking cooked this up. They're just looking at smut most of the time,
right? So basically, we have this confrontation. It starts very pleasant and then it turns like you come to find out that and that's when he has a great part where he's like, "I'm giving very serious consideration to eating your wife." And then again he binds him to a chair. He puts a noose around his neck, and then he's like, again, bowels in or out, and then he goes ahead and cuts him anyway and throws him over the side. And
that's chow. And pushes him over. I love that.
Chow. Yeah, exactly. And then so then Lecter goes for a scene change, if I'm remembering. I believe this is when he decides to come back to the old US&A, if I'm remembering correctly.
Well, before we jump into that, my favorite part of...
Go ahead. Oh, I was going to say...
my favorite part of the hangings. Fire it away, bud.
Oh, I was gonna say, as far as the part, Mason was watching the video, and he was like, "Is that a hello or a goodbye? What do you
Yeah, because chow can be used both ways. Yeah,
think?"
so that's kind
Well,
of fun.
my favorite part of that hanging scene is when he hits and the guts come out and shit. There's like people start laughing and clapping at first, and then a lady's like, "Holy shit!" You know, like she just shrieks because she realizes
Right.
it's real, and then
And there are some
it's not as
people who are
pleasant.
laughing too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they're
And
laughing and like fully clapping, I think.
there is a grim humor to it, and I'm sure Lecter definitely felt the humor because
Oh,
again,
yeah.
that supposedly was exactly what happened to the dude's ancestor, and Lecter had been dropping hints from the get-go. Hey, this is what happened to this guy, and it's like,
Mhm.
Yeah, he
yeah,
was thinking about it, I think, from the moment that he met him, you know, because
oh,
that's the type of dude that he is. There's some telling moments in that. Like, I don't think he would have eaten the wife because she was actually legit and she was into the
oh
same
yeah,
kind of stuff. You know, he had a connection with her. He brought her that poem at the opera or whatever. And there's that moment during that where she tries to show it to her husband, the inspector dude, and he's like, "Oh, yeah, I've seen it." You know, he's just kind of smoking his cigarette, which I'm
yeah,
sure annoyed Lecter to no end.
yeah,
And I like the symbolism of the phone that Clarice was just on
yeah.
breaking on the ground, and then the guts spilling on top of that. Like, you know, if he had spilled his guts to her, he wouldn't have had to spill them to Lecter, literally.
Yeah, it's a good way to say it.
Yeah, I like the morbid humor in this is great, and the kind of jumping ahead, but in the scene that's in David's background there, like the morbid humor in that whole scene is just spectacular. Plus, like he basically takes a shot at St. Paul's, saying he hated women too, and using that in reference to Ray Liotta's character, which that's another very kind of telling
Oh,
reference.
just the
Um,
fact that he takes the scalpel and goes underneath the skin and removes the top half of his head, and you see the brain sitting there, and
Yeah.
he's putting the knife all over the place. Well, he doesn't really need this part,
Yeah.
and then he takes a slice of it,
Mhm.
fries a little bit of it, and then feeds it to him. It's
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
It's
Oh yeah. Oh.
it's
Yeah.
very I find that very darkly humorous, but
Same here.
Yeah.
I also the funny part about that is that it's very very dangerous to eat brains. If you're gonna kids, if you're gonna become a cannibal, don't eat the brain because you can catch the human equivalent of mad cow disease called
They're
kuru.
delicious, though. I didn't
Right.
want to bring this up the whole time because brains are fucking delicious.
that
I get them in
apparently
tacos
so.
sometimes.
That's the other thing that's crazy is that apparently the brain is very delicious, but again, it's very very dangerous because you can
It's a
catch
gamble.
mad.
You're rolling the dice, you know.
So
Basically,
it would be like Fuju.
yeah, or
Yeah,
like
but
the poisonous pufferfish that can
Well,
only
that's
be
what I'm
cooked
talking
by.
about.
Yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
Uh,
It's
it's
highly recommend it though, kids. If you got a local taco truck, hit up the lingua, which is the tongue, and the
yeah.
cabeza, which is the brain, and sometimes head bits in there too. You know. I got
Okay.
adventurous, and I found I got a taste for it, man.
So
Yeah.
speaking of completely morbid humor, I don't remember precisely what scene this was in, but I'm looking at the quotes, and this is between Mason and his doctor. So what do you think, Cordell? Does Lecter want to fuck her or kill her or eat her alive? Probably all three, though I wouldn't want to predict in what order.
Yes,
That's great. Love
that's
that.
good stuff.
Yeah,
But
that guy gets it.
but
well, and I love the fact how he's telling Cordell he's in it. He's in this shit up to his knees while he's on that balcony, and Hannibal Lecter, once he gets freed, he's like, you could just push him over the thing and just say I did it.
right, yeah. But again, we kind of skipped ahead to there. But let's go ahead, I guess, to the. Geez, for the life of me, I can't remember how he ended up in their custody. That's the
Because it's at that point in the movie where the runtime's getting a
yeah,
little
right.
long. You know, and you're just like, I'm gonna eat part of a sandwich or something.
Yeah.
You know, just the gut scene got me hungry. I'm gonna fucking just take a break for a minute. You know,
who's hungry?
So I can't remember honestly this time either.
And Clarice are on the phone, and she's trying to figure out where he is inside of the train station, and she keeps hearing the sounds, and then he goes out. And he gets grabbed and nabbed by Mason's dudes, Carlos or whatever, because Carlos's brother. We kind of glossed over the fact that his brother basically gets his head lopped off.
Oh yeah,
at the whole Patsy scene.
right. When they go in immediately after him, and he encounters one of them,
which is why Hannibal says something about your brothers. You're probably smelling a bit like your brother,
right?
Or as bad as your brother, or something like that. But while he's locked up, and that's when Clarice pops into the barn and saves comes to save the day, even though she's like saving the worst of the two evils or whatever. And I
kind of like Hannibal a little better than Mason, you know.
I do too.
I mean, most of the people he kills are kind of assholes, you know.
Right.
Barney points it out when he talks about how he was just like cordial to Hannibal, and that's why he got on with him so well, you know. He wasn't a piece of shit, you know.
Well, and I can certainly speak to the fact that when people treat you well, you tend to want to treat them well in return. You tend to remember that. Versus when people don't treat you well, then you're not going to stick your neck out for them when they need you.
And Lecter also would sometimes, every once in a while, he would do what you might call a public service. In terms of, it wasn't just the people that disrespected him. Like in the first, Silence of the Lambs, of course, you have the thing where he got Miggs to kill himself.
Yeah.
And after Miggs was unspeakably rude to Clarice, and that was also part of what, in a way, Miggs helped, because he was one of the that rudeness was one of the reasons that Lecter called her back and gave her that clue about Raspel.
Yeah, but, he says I would never. It was cum. He came on her.
Yeah.
He says to her, I would never have had that happen to you. Discourtesy is unspeakably ugly to me.
And then, of course, one of my favorite lines he has is not the longest or the wittiest, but it was great. And that was when Clarice said something to him of, frankly, that's the sort of thing Miggs would say. And he just looks at next one.
Brilliant.
But anyway, so we have that scene where you guys already mentioned there is that nice moment where where Clarice has kind of set him free. The pigs are milling about, and Mason and Cordell are looking from up above. And Lecter, in a moment, has already read Cordell and knows what he's on about. And he's like, if you were to push him in, you could always tell them it was me. And he thinks about it for a minute, releases the brake, and that's the end of Verger. It's I like that part. I was like, because all throughout, you get this strong, you could almost call it a Nightmare Funhouse version, if you will, of Montgomery Burns and Mr. Smithers, because you have the whole thing of the rotten, evil old man. He treats the other one as total crap, and Cordell is nowhere near as deferential as Smithers, but
Put some glasses on him, he'd play a good Smithers in a live action version, though. little fucking buzz cut, flat top on him. Yeah, I'm seeing it.
Right. But so that was actually kind of, even though the whole idea of someone getting eaten up by pigs is not the most appetizing idea in the world.
Or is it?
It is. Verger's the sort of character where you're like, okay.
Yeah. it's a fitting
I'm on
end,
board.
you know.
Yeah. And then
they got to finish the job, you know, because this all started because he was feeding them to animals, you know.
Right. And then you have the whole they're back to Norva, DC, that general area, and you get some of the you get that really lovely scene, really lovely dinner scene where
Still
it's up there with something you might see on Downton Abbey.
I don't think I ever saw that on Downton Abbey, but
missed opportunity.
At any rate, well, there is
briefly. I promise I won't take up too much time here, Brent or Jake. Sorry, you guys are definitely not interchangeable. I just miss them, so
yeah,
definitely. There's some iconic imagery there because there's that part where like Lecter's carrying Clarice. He's walking through the thick or whatever. I always thought that was just fucking awesome, you know. Yeah. And I think that was like a key trailer shot.
And I'm trying to remember. I'm trying to remember again how they get from point A to point B. If you guys think it's relevant, we'll go for it. But this is Dave. You're probably going to be the best one to answer this. We're probably at the point or past the point at this point where the movie diverges from the book, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, somewhat. But not too much.
Oh, okay.
I feel like this is a fairly good adaptation of the book. So, so I mean, you definitely get the gore scene here at this end, and I think they did a good job between Julianne Moore and the whole fact that, you know, Hannibal Lecter does not want to hurt her in any sense of the word.
Right.
You know, I mean, yet she clasps those cuffs on his hand, and he's like, "This is gonna really hurt." Yeah. And then they cut away. Okay. That's the only bit. That's the only thing that I hate about this film. I wish they would have shown what the hell happened.
Well, no, they did. They did though. He cut his own hand off to save her.
Yeah. They didn't pretty... exactly show that though.
They didn't really show that, did they?
Well, no, they did. You saw the stumpiness of his hand on the plane.
Oh well,
is it really going to benefit from a severed hand after he cooks a guy's own brains in front of him, though? You know.
Well, I mean, I think that's pretty key to his character because, again, even when he is caught, it's the old, coyotes that are caught in traps. They chew through their own legs to get out, and in that sense, it's like he is most definitely a predator who is caught, but rather than kill the prey, he cuts his own hand off for her sake. I mean, if anything, like that's about the best that he can do for self-sacrifice.
I would have wanted to see it happen.
I think we did. It was just subtle.
I would have wanted to see it happen. I'm sorry.
I don't think we needed to see that. But
I think we saw it happen. It was just subtle.
No, we did not.
Well, we saw the reveal, which I agree. I'd have to be in Dane's camp on this. It makes it more like, holy shit, he cut his hand off.
Yeah, well, especially given that a lot of people couldn't accept the brain thing, which I'll even admit when I watched it, I was like, you know, this is either the apex of grotesquerie or this is the point where people could say this jumped the shark into ridiculousness. Which again, it's horror.
I thought it was amazing.
Well, I liked it too, but like horror and comedy, by their very nature, are like this. They're intertwined, and sometimes one can overpower the other because the what you're seeing is so kind of unspeakable that you're like, well, you know, could I laugh at this or what? And I could see it.
As far as what we're seeing, I remembered the connecting thread, which was while they were in Verger's, it might have been one of his people or him himself, but she was actually shot. So Lecter had nursed her back to some form of health. That's what it was.
Yes.
And that was part of the reason she was so
still
druggy.
drugged.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But he had dressed her in a nightgown and everything. And they had taken up residence in Krendler's weekend home, which, again, I love the idea. I did not realize. I thought the house looked familiar. I knew that it was probably a Virginia setting. I love the idea that it's the same house that Richard Dreyfuss's character owned in What About Bob? Think about that. Let's see that psychiatrist and Lecter in the same room together.
That would be awesome. Great. He would pin Richard Dreyfuss down and he'd be like, "I think I will eat your heart."
I think he would love Bob though. I think he.
Oh, I'm sure he'd probably.
There's
he'd
just
probably
a shark
Bob
in the next
amazing.
cell for no reason. You know what I mean? Just a shark in there.
Bad CGI sharks.
And we will have to hit What About Bob one of these days. If we do a regional one that's not horror specific, that will be one of my. But at any rate,
the capper to the whole thing after he cuts his own hand off to save her. The capper to the whole thing is that he's still on the loose. He's still doing his thing. But in some ways, you might say that he's kind of setting up his own form of succession. He's keeping the monstrosity alive by feeding the child a piece of brain. And the implication, I think, is partially that he's giving that kid something of a taste of what he has been, of what he has known. And I wouldn't say necessarily like an apprenticeship because it's not quite as mythological as that, but I think the implication is that his breed of grotesquerie, all the things that he's known in his life, that will continue in some form or fashion.
Right. Well, so a couple I did want to
or unwitting accidental or unwitting cannibalism is always fucking hilarious to me.
Yeah.
I don't know why. I just from Soylent Green, even if it's like in a processed form, to just any time someone's accidentally or unknowingly eating a person.
Yeah.
I just fucking die laughing. You know.
So I will admit that I always found that ending pretty great. And I was always amused because I was told that the ending originally was essentially Clarice and Lecter waltzing off into the sunset, if you will.
Yeah.
And I was like, I thought this was the less disturbing ending. But honestly, I'm thinking it might have been the less disturbing ending, at least for fans of Starling.
Well, I think it makes more sense for her character because I think she, again, I don't think she wants to see him dead, but I think she has such a commitment to what she stands for and who she is that he would rather cut his own hand off than to destroy this last bit of goodness that he sees in the world. And I think
on Dave's point of showing the I think it's great that they didn't, partly because you don't know for a beat if he cut his own hand off or hers or simply cut the handcuff chain. You don't know. And it's nice giving you that pause of, holy crap, what just happened? Until you see her with both hands. And then it's
I would argue that had they just had random severed hands going down, man, that would have taken this a little further into being a straight up horror movie.
And we also
needed to be, you know? It's just that's excessive at that point,
yes.
you know.
And
I'm a fan of sticking severed hands in there, you know. If you want to stick them in wherever you want, just put them in there. But
and just talk briefly about obsessive. And this is why I'm not looking at our overall screen, Dave. Again, that was the worst possible picture you could put up. I don't know what it is, but for me, one of my triggers, one of the things that bugs the crap out of me is anything involving breaking, opening, cutting, whatever, a skull, anything involving the brain just weeks me out. And that scene just bugged me. Now, the one part...
Eyeballs do it for me.
That's for me, too. And that's the other big one. Like, but the one part of that was the saving grace was when Krendler ate a piece of his own brain and enjoyed it. That was very amusing in a dark, twisted sense.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
But still, I look away from much of that scene. I'm straight up about that. But anyway,
Yeah.
it is getting a little late, and I know Dustin's waiting to come on and talk about Tusk. So, let's do a real quick talk about the production of the movie. Do we feel, let's just say generally, compared to Silence of the Lambs and whatever, do we feel like it holds up? Is it on a production
I feel
level?
Yeah, the production value.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's got
you go
a
ahead,
much bigger
Forrest.
it's got a much bigger scope than Silence of the Lambs does.
Right.
Yeah.
And
Scott,
do we
What were you
have
gonna
a?
say there, Forrest?
Ridley Scott's worst movies still look good.
Oh yeah, his films do look good. He is good at making a quality, professional looking film.
Yeah.
Of course.
And
Silence of the Lambs had a closer, like, grimier vibe to it overall,
well,
whereas this one's bigger and more elegant, and that fits
Jonathan
the
Demme
tone of
has
the movie.
more of a documentary overall. He's done a lot of documentaries, and I
Yeah.
feel like Silence of Lambs had more of that sort of vibe to it, and this one had more of the Hollywood blockbuster vibe to it.
Yeah.
Silence of the
Well,
Lambs was what you might think of like True Crime Journal or something being made into a visual thing,
Yeah.
whereas this feels like more of a movie.
And the Silence of the Lambs was not that big budgeted of a movie, whereas this had a lot more money behind it. And let's also not forget that despite not being all that well received, this movie was a massive hit, massively. Like this
Yeah, people paid to see it for sure.
yeah, this thing made so much money, which is kind of funny because again, the one that people talk about is still Silence of the Lambs, and that one was a hit. It was more of a word of mouth kind of hit, but it definitely did good business, and it actually did better business the more that people went to see it over time. But this one, I think partially because the hype was so much, and also because because the first one had been so successful, this one did massive business, and so it was not a bomb whatsoever.
Right.
Very
we
much
wanna-
the
Too
opposite.
that Red Dragon did a good job of hitting kind of a middle ground between the two.
Yeah,
like it's
Right.
got that close grimy
still
vibe
think-
still, but also that elegant thing
Well,
going on.
and it
One
was
thing that
that was
still
that was
bugged me-
Brett Ratner who did that, and he's
Ugh.
obviously kind of on the outs these days. But I'll give him credit for being able to honor the overall look and tone of Jonathan Demme. Like he was able to adapt. I don't really know what would be considered Brett Ratner's style, but like he was able to, I think, do a good. He was able to honor Jonathan Demme's style and what he had set up.
Right.
It felt like we were in that world, that pacing, all that stuff.
And we'll get, like I said, I think one day, hopefully, we'll be able to hit that one.
Uh-huh.
So in the meantime, let's go ahead and everyone give their favorite scenes or quotes real quick. I guess start with you, Mo.
Oh, favorite scene? I mean, the brains. Come on.
Yeah.
It's hard for that not to be my overall favorite scene. I think secondary to that, just cool like scene of dialogue or something. Probably that meeting with Starling and Mason. Because it drips with creepiness. How he's like telling her about his past crimes, and she's like, "No, dude, we don't need that." And he's just like, "Well, I'm telling it anyways because I'm a fucking creep." That was pretty great. So yeah, those would be my favorite, of the two there.
All right. How about you, Forrest?
Pretty much any scene involving eating brains, whether it's whether
Yeah.
whether it's Krendler's or if it's Hannibal feeding a small child. Also Verger. I would say when we first learn about his past with Lecter, and watching him getting gored by those boars. And actually, I'm going to throw one more. Because I'll admit, Clarice wakes up after wakes up in that black. Like I'll admit, Julianne Moore looked hot in that black dress.
Just don't have her cry. It's less
All
crying
right.
in the movies, and we're good.
Dave?
I would have to say that whole brain scene too. I mean, even though it creeps me the fuck out, like anything that has to do with brains or opening them up, or because as Clarice was coming down, you heard the.
Yeah. Oof.
Yeah.
And you know what it
You
was?
know?
'Cause you had the previous scene of him stealing the stuff from the doctor's office.
But you hear that, and you expect to hear the crunch of the bone, and then the squish of the brain as he goes into it, and you're like, "Fucking hell! What the hell
He's
am
got a
I?"
steady hand, man. He just cracked the shell and
You
lifted
didn't
it off,
expect
you know?
that. Exactly.
Well, no, I didn't expect them to be that graphic or anything like that, and I would have to say any conversation that Hannibal Lecter and Clarice had, as well as because the first time he actually speaks to her, he's like, "Is that Clarice?" And she sputters and she's like, "Is that you, Hannibal?" You know,
Yeah.
And he's like, I'm sorry, but you kind of caught me at a bad moment here."
Mm-hmm.
I wish
totally.
we could chat, which is a nice callback to the first film. Again, best line any character has ever ended on in any movie. I do wish we could chat longer, but I'm having an old friend for dinner.
Yeah.
And I suppose, I guess the whole the whole conversation between Mason and Clarice about how he came to have his face, the way it is, because we don't get that in Silence of the Lambs or Hunter, that scene. I mean, this is the fourth victim of Hannibal Lecter, so we're just getting what happened to him now, instead of in some case file that Clarice had uncovered in some garage. So I have a fondness for Gary Olson's character here for some reason.
He rocks.
You don't expect what. I mean, you don't expect what happens, So
yeah.
But in any case, those are some of my favorite scenes. Anyone else?
Well,
how about you, Dane?
I mean, you got to give it up to Eating Brains as far as memorability. But I have to say, I think for me, it's not so much the mere act of eating brains. It's more so what it all represents, because I think it shows that he has surgical precision but also a dark sense of humor, that he is willing to feed this guy his own brains, and that he's so disgusting to him. But then I have to give it to, I mean, that's a memorable scene, but it leads into what I'd say is my real favorite. I had to look up the exact quote because it's brilliant writing, I think. "My freedom, just that. You'd take that from me. And if you did, would they have you back? Do you think the FBI, those people you despise almost as much as they despise you, will they give you a medal, Clarice, do you think? Would you have it professionally framed and hang it on your wall to look at and remind you of your courage and incorruptibility? All you would need for that, Clarice, is a mirror." And it's like that says it all right there, that he is willing to sacrifice his hand, his, much of the instrument of his doing what he does, he would sacrifice that so that she can still be that force for good in the world. And I'm like, that's the character right there. And that's why their relationship will always be a great one.
All right. And then for me, again, there's little moments scattered throughout, not near as many that I would single out as a brilliant moment as with the other film, but there's definitely a lot you can appreciate about it. And I have always loved that moment of feeding the brain to the little kid. I mean, that's kind of a sick, twisted moment. And
I
I
love
love
that you love that, Jake, because it's not something I would expect you to love.
and the part where he actually feeds it to Krendler, even though everything else about that scene wigged me out, Krendler was such a chauvinistic dick that I did like seeing him get his just desserts in a sense.
Quite literally.
Yeah.
And the same thing with Verger, the thing where the doctor just quietly releases the brake and lets him go off the side. You know, those were a great. And then the overall, there were little moments. You know, any interaction between Hannibal and Clarice is memorable in general between the two films. So overall, there are a lot of good little moments. Not as many that knocked it out of the park as some of the others, but yeah. So that's really all I have on that one. And I guess we probably want to wait until after the other to do our basic outros.
Yeah.
Did anyone else
Yeah,
have
that's
any
fine.
final thoughts for this one?
Well, I have a little tradition that we're gonna do through
Okay.
these. It'll take me just like a minute, you know.
Okay.
It's not gonna be long-winded or anything. Just listing off the films. But I recently got in regional horror films, 1958 to 1990, a state-by-state guide with interviews by Brian Albright. Highly recommend grabbing it.
Tablet.
Think how
What's
much
that?
more awesome that would be if it's more recent.
Yeah, actually, I was just saying I had that same book on my tablet.
Ah.
Oh yeah, dude. I really hope that they do a sequel to it. I think they're probably waiting until the timelines make sense.
That looks fun.
But, you know, in the spirit of this, we're going to give you some movie recommendations from the Virginias. I guess we'll call it. We got Mutants in Paradise in Virginia. You know, that's the one we're doing first. And then West Virginia. Apparently they never noticed that.
Yeah.
You know, I just always thought that there was just Virginia. So I guess I'm an idiot. They did denote one of them with a direction. The other one's just Virginia. But we got Mutants in Paradise from 1984 by Scott Apostolou. And then we also got The Redeemer, Son of Satan, which is a convoluted title. Its alternate title, Class Reunion Massacre, is much cooler. And that's from 1978. And then over in West Virginia, we got Chillers from 1988, directed by Daniel Boyd. Previous film was by some dude just called Constantine, apparently. Maybe the comic book character. I don't know.
Or the Emperor
Well,
Constantine.
I do know
possibly.
when you mentioned this, I was like, oh my God, really? Especially because two of us are from Virginia, so there were two of us who had to submit from Virginia. And the vast majority of the Virginia films have been after 1990. And there are relatively few horror films. We were able, I think between us, me and Brandon, probably found 8 that sort of counted. You know, if we do a regional one for Virginia, it has become a maybe 2 or 3 film a year state. If that's probably a good average,
Right.
I think.
Yeah, you guys only have 5 total listed in the horror book here, so
yeah, I'm surprised we found that many. But yeah, I'll be curious to read on those. Yeah.
Well, dude, I think this one especially you would enjoy, and that's Invasion of the Space Creatures, also by Daniel Boyd, which I just got recently on a 2-pack with Space Days from Troma. And then we also got Teenage Strangler from 1964, directed by Ben Parker. So those last 3 were from West Virginia. First 2 were from Virginia, and that's all of the submissions in the book here. You know, he seems to have kind of tried to go for some of those more lesser-known movies from the States. So that's good. Check those out if you get a chance. Several of them sound like shit, so they're probably on YouTube.
Right. Yeah, good times. Thanks for that. And I guess we'll hand it to Dave to sign us off here.
Alrighty, stay tuned for more fun as we go into a movie that has something to do extremely with some body horror, Tusk. If you'll join us on our Inside Movies Galore page momentarily after our break. So thank you for listening. Have a great day, evening, morning, wherever you are. And